What if I told you that Ferrari could have been sabotaging without wanting the performance of Lewis Hamilton all this time? What Fred Vasseur discovered in Mugello will change your way of seeing the 2025 season. Ferrari arrived in Mugello with a clear objective: stop the technical and psychological decline that was beginning to suffocate the team from within. The atmosphere was dense in Maranello. Although in the papers they were still the second-best team in the championship, reality was much more painful. McLaren had escaped with a humiliating advantage of more than 230 points in the construction table. And it was not just a matter of points. The general perception in the paddock was that Ferrari had been undressed by his rivals, showing himself as a giant with feet of mud. This latent crisis forced the team to make a desperate decision: change Firestone for Mugello. But this change was not just logistics. It was symbolic. Firestone, the Ferrari backyard, no longer offered the necessary conditions to test the limits of SF-25. Its low-speed curves, its unscented surface and their history of comfortable sessions no longer served to face the real problems that afflicted the car. Mugello, on the other hand, was quite the opposite. A technical, demanding, brutal track with the mistakes and perfect to bring to light the structural inconsistencies that until that time had been hidden under the carpet. The choice of this track was not accidental. Ferrari's technical direction, led by Loic Serra, had identified an urgent need: analyze the behavior of the new rear suspension under extreme lateral load conditions. High-speed curves such as Arrabbiata 1 and 2, along with the dynamic compressions of the middle sector, offered the ideal environment to understand why the car did not respond to Lewis Hamilton's driving style. Because yes, this test was not just to validate components, it was, in essence, a rescue test for its star pilot. The pressure on Fred Vasseur was maximum. His personal commitment to bring Hamilton was overshadowed by mediocre results. Mugello represented an opportunity to redeem that decision. Therefore, the test was designed as a surgical operation. Each return counted, each sensor imported, and each adjustment in the car was documented to the millimeter. What was at stake was more than performance. It was the credibility of the Ferrari 2025 project. And while the media only saw a filming day, behind the boxes of the box, a silent battle was being fought to save the technical soul of the team. Mugello was not just a circuit. It was the confessional where Ferrari expected, finally, to listen to the truth about his car. And what they discovered exceeded any prediction. Fred Vasseur is not a conventional team leader. His style is defined by proximity to details, obsession with technical efficiency, and null tolerance to conformism. Therefore, when the test in Mugello began to show strange signals in the behavior of the Lewis Hamilton car, Vasseur was not limited to reviewing reports. He put the monkey, entered the box and ordered a complete physical review of the SF-25, piece by piece, cable. What he discovered during these inspections would completely change Ferrari's internal narrative. And that was when everything came to light. The rear suspension of the Hamilton car, specifically in the upper triangle and its anchor to the gearbox, did not react symmetrically. Although in modern cars any millimeter difference is detected with sensors, this failure had escaped the diagnostic systems because it was not a breakage, but a progressive structural misalignment that only manifested in certain dynamic load conditions. The car was working against its own pilot. Telemetry confirmed it. The rear brake system presented anomalous temperature peaks, incompatible with the planned thermal regime. In other words, the brakes were absorbing loads for those that had not been designed. To this were added irregularities in weight transfer during braking and acceleration phases, something that completely explained why Hamilton felt that the car danced under it. It was not a problem of perception. It was a real structural failure, deeply and dangerously underestimated. This discovery stunned the team. On the one hand, it was a relief for Hamilton. There were finally objective evidence that their sensations were valid. But on the other hand, it was a devastating blow for Ferrari. It meant that his quality control protocol had failed. That a car of 250 million euros, developed by one of the most laureate teams in history, had competed in several races with a basic defect of mechanical geometry. And the most serious, that only Hamilton's car presented it. Vasseur, far from paralyzing, made a drastic decision. He ordered a complete reconstruction of the Hamilton car from scratch, and stopped all scheduled activity to analyze whether this defect was present, although to a lesser extent in other elements of the car. From that moment on, the priority of the team ceased to be looking for tense in aerodynamics. Now, everything revolved around and correct this invisible failure that had undermined the performance of its star signing. The most disturbing of the finding in Mugello was not only the nature of the technical problem, but the way in which the structural fragility of the internal Ferrari process itself was exposed. The anomaly detected in Lewis Hamilton's car exposed a truth that nobody inside the team wanted to admit. For months, it had been operating under erroneous assumptions. Assumptions that, being denied by the physical inspection led by Vasseur, forced Ferrari to reconfigure not only the car, but their own route technical approach. The discovery of misalignment in the rear suspension could not be considered a simple manufacturing failure. It was a systemic defect that questioned the consistency of quality controls in the assembly line. This generated an internal technical crisis of enormous magnitude. Ferrari had to audit the assembly processes of his cars and compare them with the original SF-25 tolerance standards. It was discovered that, in the case of Hamilton's car, a minimal difference in the anchor points and tension of the suspension elements could alter the complete dynamic behavior of the chassis. And this little difference had sneaked into multiple Grand Prix sessions without anyone identifying it. This finding caused a total rethinking of the individual configuration validation system. From that moment on, Ferrari established a new technical protocol. Each car, even being theoretically identical to the other, had to undergo a specific structural symmetry test battery before each race. This marked a break with the previous practice, in which it was assumed that the telemetric data of both cars were enough to determine the parity of behavior. It was no longer like that. Hamilton had demonstrated, with facts, that these assumptions could be lethal for performance. Charles Leclerc, on the other hand, was also affected. Although his car did not present the same structural defect, the doubts generated also led to review their configuration. This opened a tense conversation in Maranello about the equity of resources, the priority of technical solutions, and the shared responsibility for errors. The team began to walk along a thin line between collaboration and internal competition, a tension that had already marked previous times of Ferrari and now returned strongly. Finally, rival teams soon noticed change. Ferrari's decision not to send Mugello data to the FIA until days later fed rumors that the discovered defect could touch the limits of the technical regulations. The Federation requested detailed documentation on the modifications made from the test. This added an institutional pressure layer, because now Ferrari had to demonstrate that his new configuration did not violate any rule, something especially delicate in a year where the battle for the title is still open. The technical turn that began with a simple manual inspection became an internal storm with sports, political, and human repercussions. Ferrari was no longer the team that came to Mugello to film. It was now a group under reconstruction, facing their own ghosts and redrawing from within the bases of their season. The SF-25 could no longer afford more errors, because the margin was not only minimal, it was definitive. The finding in Mugello not only was a before and after for Ferrari, but also radically altered the perspective with which the rest of the 2025 season must be analyzed. From this moment on, any prediction that does not contemplate the effects of this technical reconfiguration will inevitably be outdated. Because what happened in that test was not a simple improvement, it was a priority re-engineering, a deep tactical restructuring that could have long-range effects, both for Hamilton and for the entire championship. To begin with, surgical intervention in Hamilton's SF-25 could transform its performance from the next Grand Prix. By eliminating asymmetry in the suspension and redefining the chassis load points, Ferrari hopes to return the British pilot a predictable, reliable, and effective driving platform. This will not only allow you to attack the curves with greater aggressiveness, but also adjust your pilot style without the need to compensate structural defects. In a nutshell, Hamilton will fight with the car again, not against him. But beyond the car, what has also changed is the mental approach of the team. Until now, Ferrari operated in reactive mode. He solved problems on the march, trying to limit damage and optimize how little it worked. After Mugello, the mentality has mutated towards a proactive logic. It is no longer just about surviving McLaren, but about understanding, dominating, and exceeding their own limits. This new spirit has resulted in a technical update plan that prioritizes mechanical reliability, aerodynamic response in high-load curves, and the recovery of efficiency in brakes thermal management, an area that had been completely disregarded in recent races. Hamilton's redemption within Ferrari can alter not only the internal dynamics of the team, but also the balance of power between pilots. If the British begins to change strong performances and re-shows himself as the dominant figure of the garage, he is likely that old leadership tensions will be revived that already marked his passage through other teams. In an organization as structured as Ferrari, any imbalance between its two pilots can have unpredictable consequences. So the real question is no longer what failed in Hamilton's car, but what Ferrari will do with what he now knows. Will they turn this learning a tool to fight for the championship, or will they fall back into the old patterns of misunderstood pride and resistance to change? Because if there is something clear after Mugello, it is this: the 2025 season has ceased to be a simple persecution of points. It has become a character test. And Ferrari, finally, seems willing to face herself with the honesty demanded by a team that aims to be champion again.